welcome to the podcast, listeners and watchers. Today I am joined by the wonderful Damon Maassen, a human-centric equity and inclusion strategist, certified coach, learning solution architect whose work sits beautifully at the intersection of strategy and humanity. Damon has a rare ability to design learning experiences that don't just inform, they shift people, and they really do. So through storytelling, data, reflection, he helps learners move from awareness to meaningful action, and his work spans so much. It spans like inclusive hiring academies, leadership programs, culture change sessions, connecting values to everyday behaviors, and he makes inclusion something people can live as well as talk about.
Mhm.
And Damon's approach is really distinct because he's, as you'll see, and as I find, Damon and I have actually started to spend a lot of time collaborating this year, and it's been brilliant. And his presence is so grounded with authenticity. He holds space, he's authentic, and he balances kind of vulnerability and focus. And that sort of spans from executive coaching, navigating change, to team workshops on belonging. So yeah, and Damon's guiding belief is that sustainable change begins with empathy, integrity, and curiosity, seeing people
Mhm.
as whole humans first. So I'm thrilled to have him with us to explore what it means to lead with humanity and turn conversation into connection. Over to you.
Mhm.
Oh, and I'm Naomi Whitehead, solution focused practitioner, coach, trainer, now podcaster, um, facilitator, and really passionate about diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, belonging, and accessibility.
Mhm. Yes. And love all of that. I mean, you continue to expand your reach and the impact. And that's really the heart of this work. It is about connection and community. And I'm also going to throw in kindness because that is my third pillar of intention for this year. And when I wake up in the morning and I think about, okay, how would I like to show up today? How am I going to impact and influence these three pillars? They have truly been my guide throughout this year.
Oh, wow. That's lovely. You're so clear and intentional, and I think it makes a real difference. And you do such meaningful work helping people and organizations to reimagine leadership and inclusion. So, Damon, bearing in mind what you said about kindness, what drives you?
What drives me? So, in addition to those three pillars, when I wake up in the morning, I also think about intention. Like how do I want to show up, and what is the impact that I'd like to have? And when I think specifically around this intersection of leadership and inclusion, what really drives me is my belief in leadership is that it begins with how we show up. It's not by the title that we hold or the position that we're in. And as you shared in that beautiful, lovely intro, my work is really about humanity, and it's creating those spaces where people can feel seen, they can feel valued, and they're psychologically safe enough to show up authentically and to contribute meaningfully.
Yeah, it stands out in everything in the way that you are. And what about leadership as something that people hold rather than earn?
Yeah, that is a reframing and quite a powerful shift as well. Thinking about, leadership again is something that's already held. And, my belief in what I've found is that leadership, it's an everyday practice. So what I mean by that is in an everyday practice, it shows up in how we listen, how we extend empathy, and how we model integrity. And most importantly, leadership is really about being with people, not above them. And so I want to pause for a moment and repeat that for anyone that may have been multitasking while they're listening or viewing, is that, again, leadership is really about being with people, not above them. And, when I also reflect on my own experience and the great leaders that have really had profound impact, I find that those profound leadership moments, they happen in the quiet, in ordinary ways. It could be like a word of encouragement, an act of gentle accountability, or even when they pause and ask, "How are you really?" and are truly waiting for your response.
That's so interesting. Yeah, waiting for your response and present. And then, I mean, what I think is really important with that is people ask, they wait for your response, and then you notice that they've allowed the spaciousness for whatever comes from that response, and that they're ready to hear, respond, react, and
Mm,
continue to co-create a leadership culture that can accommodate whatever you might be bringing to that, whether it's challenging or excitement or something in
yeah.
between or fear or yeah. So really interesting. And is there and you talk a lot about centering humanity, which feels related to this. What does that look like for you in relation to this and in practice?
Yeah, centering humanity has gone beyond just being part of my professional brand. I mean, it sounds so catchy and buzzy. It's like, ooh, centering humanity. It piques interest. Let's learn more.
Mm.
But to make sure it goes beyond just a flashy tagline, for me, humanity and being able to center that, it means slowing down to see the whole person in front of you, not just the role, not the results or their title, but to really pause and see the whole person that is in front of you. It's also about curiosity versus assumption. And that could be my 10 plus years of meditation practice speaking in here about being able to really embrace that curious mindset. But I found significant awareness and learning that comes from that shift between curiosity and assumption. And specifically, when I think about my coaching and consulting work, I've learned that people don't necessarily resist change. What they do resist, or what could be a source of that resistance, is feeling unseen in the process of change. And, studies have shown that leaders who communicate change with empathy and transparency, it increases trust levels by nearly 40%. I mean, that's significant. And when I reflect on the amazing leaders I've had the privilege to work with, and as we're always navigating significant change, no surprise in a corporate landscape, but the ones that we're really leaning into empathy and transparency help to reduce those feelings of anxiety, those feelings of stress, even if the outcome, per se, of a reorganization that was coming wasn't necessarily the most positive of outcomes, but we still felt as though we were all part of that process. And, that's where we think about centering humanity. It's not just a nice to have or a soft skill, it's really strategic because it helps people stay connected, even navigating uncertainty.
Yeah, and I think it was really interesting you say there about the slowing down bit first. And even when you said that, I sort of felt myself like deepen into the present, which I often do when I'm with you. And I think that's really powerful, that slowing down, because that act in the first place enables all the other things to flow from that. And when you say transparency, I'm guessing you mean, people being really specific about this is a difficult time, we're doing this, I'm going to make these decisions, even about very negative things, if people are specifically articulating that out loud so that you can anticipate what's coming, that's better. An amazing stat with 40%. And then thinking about, yeah, is there anything you want to say on that? Yeah, before I carry on.
Oh, I was just going to say, in addition to that, even thinking about when leaders do all of the things that have just been described here, but then also say, here's what I know now, here's what I don't know right now, and here's my commitment to keeping you informed. Just that entire process being outlined and being able to really lean into that level of transparency is so incredibly powerful.
And admitting what you don't know is really, really interesting. I've
Yeah.
always tried to do that in any kind of leadership position, and I think it has a huge impact. So, has there been a moment that where your perspective on leadership significantly shifted?
Yes, yes. So there is something that comes to mind. I think about, I've shared kind of a little further back in the past throughout my time in corporate structures, but also thinking about these past few years as I've been more in the coaching and consulting space. And, there was a time that I was leading a session, and it was for a client that was going through significant organizational change. And There was a participant, she was very quiet, she very thoughtful leader, and she had shared how unseen that she had felt for years because her leadership style was relational rather than directive. And when she shared that, there was an entire shift in the energy in the room. And it was also such a powerful connection for myself and my own lived experience because I was reflecting on all of the years that I too had felt unseen because my leadership style was more relational versus directive. And having that moment for that leader to share that and to foster connection, and it started to also raise awareness amongst her peers in
Mm.
terms of what her experience was like, how perhaps they had contributed to her feeling unseen. And it really set the stage and opened the door of a reminder for everyone there that leadership doesn't have one tone or personality type. And really leadership's greatest impact, it often happens in those moments of listening, reflection, and presence. It's not about authority or control. And that was such a powerful shift for that entire group of leaders in that moment.
Yeah, that there is multiple different ways and styles. And, an inclusive leadership has to continue to evolve, particularly in the current climate. And, there being multiple different styles of leadership echoes the entire thing that you and I and many, many other people are passionate about, which is diversity and inclusion and equity and expansive. So you can mirror that on every level so that it sort of creates a virtuous circle. You celebrate it in leadership, you celebrate it in people, in teams, in organizations, in structures. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it's amazing when there is that opportunity to mirror everything that you just outlined there versus what is all too common of modeling just a very specific leadership style in terms of, who's receiving opportunities, recognition, rewards, and the spotlight, and everyone feeling as though that's the only type of leadership style that gets celebrated and recognized. So everyone has to conform to that one simple style versus being their true authentic leadership style.
And imagine, and it's a bit like what you were saying about slowing down and looking at the whole person, and then it also being strategic. The innovation that comes when every single kind of person
Mhm.
and voice is welcomed into a space and
Yeah.
celebrated, and they could say something completely what some might consider bizarre or unusual or distinct, then that's fresh. And that's
Mhm.
like if we want evolution, creativity, and transformative kind of progress in companies to secure more income or a new product or whatever it might be, a new way of working, that's all going to come from this kind of absolute um like presence and embracing of one another exactly as we are, with all our quirks and all our natural strengths, and also like acknowledging things that in some contexts could be a weakness, but when harnessed can be used, like for example, the fact that I'm sensitive or whatever that might be. So
Yeah.
I know that sort of, and thinking of that actually, I know that you're fascinated and able to talk maybe about how can we help people discover the leadership that exists within them?
Yeah. What is within them? That's really the heart of it. It's not again about what someone else is giving you in order to define your leadership. And starting within, what I really strive to help individuals recognize is that leadership, it is already present in their daily lives. And when they're able to start to see all the ways that leadership is present, it builds confidence and it builds compassion.
Mm,
And you find these leaders that they stop chasing being impressive and instead they're starting to practice being intentional.
mm.
And that's a significant shift.
Yeah, I love that. And that takes real discipline. And then the more that people like lean away from trying to be impressive, which is kind of ego stuff, which has served its purpose in the world in some context. But, and yeah, leaning into that intentionality, that is amazing. And how does, for your leadership of yourself and others, how does what you've just shared connect to kind of your humility, how I mean, you partner with multiple different organizations and communities, and how do you kind of do that leadership within and that humility and the balance of it all when in your work, partnering with multiple stakeholders?
Mm. Yes, that is a great question, and how I've really developed a strong bond with humility. I try to begin each interaction, each engagement with the mindset that I am essentially entering someone else's lived experience.
Mm.
I am a guest. I am not the expert. And especially when I was early on starting my coaching and consulting career, that was a big change for me as well, realizing that it's not all about me, it's actually about everyone else. So being able to remind myself of I'm a guest here and making sure that I'm creating that space for someone to share their lived experience and for me to welcome that. And so, my role is really to listen deeply and to co-create versus to come in as a so-called expert and to prescribe something. And, humility, it really helps me to stay open to learning. And, there's an example, I've worked with multiple global teams. And so it's probably no surprise that cultural norms around things like feedback or collaboration are wildly different.
Mm,
And in those moments, it's not about me coming in to teach inclusion. Instead, it's about creating that space of discovery and for us to explore how inclusion is already being expressed in that context. And then how do we build from there?
yeah, wow. A guest in someone's lived experience. What a statement. And that you're saying that you take that into kind of again, like within a corporate culture, within a team culture, within a strategic management and leadership program, you still take that guest as in a lived experience principle because you're so passionate about bringing that kind of um belief into on all levels, not when it's not just about celebrating diverse lived experiences so that lots of different types of people can participate in the workplace. It's about saying it's going back to what you said, even as a leader, this is what you're doing, you're recognizing that you're that guest, and that is so gentle. And I imagine that people can sense that as soon as they meet you. And then if they sense that, then they already feel trusted and they already feel able to be their true selves and to express themselves. And then when you're consulting with them and co-creating, then they're going to be really open. And then the
Mhm.
conversation and the way that you are together, I imagine, then ripples out into the kind of work that you're doing in those organizations.
Yes, yes, it really does. And there's also a moment of gentle reminding that in many situations amongst many teams and organizations, this isn't necessarily anything new, especially thinking about kind of where many of us were 5 years ago at the start of the pandemic and here in the US, the start of the racial justice movement, and how there was a forced pause and these opportunities to start to lean into very courageous conversations where lived experiences were coming into these spaces. And for the first time, folks may have been really sharing what it is like to go through and experience society, with their workplaces, things of that nature. And for individuals to really be seen, heard, and committed to fostering greater levels of inclusion and belonging. And while some organizations have sort of shifted away from that in recent times, I do find power and impact in that gentle reminder of we've done this before and we can do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm curious to just move on now gently because something I'd love to have your voice on is we've talked about and you've mentioned about visibility and vulnerability and how that can sometimes feel in tension. And especially for those with intersecting identities. How have you navigated that balance personally and professionally, and also what can that teach others?
Yes, yes. What a great question here. So, intersecting identities is actually one of my favorite topics to to discuss. Um,
You've
and
taught
I've
me
had some,
so much about it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It is such an amazing way to bring in lived experiences in ways that some may not be familiar with. And, even over these past couple of months, I've been privileged to be able to lead some of these great conversations around intersecting identities. And, when I think about, that mention there about visibility and vulnerability being intertwined, I also view them as both being acts of courage. And, there have been moments where I've even had to remind myself that authenticity doesn't necessarily mean full exposure, it means alignment.
Mm,
And what I mean specifically by that is that I am able to choose when and how to share my story in ways that serve connection versus performance.
mm,
And over time, I've learned that my voice, well, really, our voices can carry significant power. And so every time that we speak authentically, it invites others to do the exact same. And that's that ripple effect that you mentioned earlier.
mm,
And I also really try to create that ripple effect with every engagement. It goes beyond just this one conversation, but what's going to happen after this one moment in time? And so part of that ripple effect for me is also not taking up space, but instead I'm making room for others to take their space, to lean
mm.
into their own space.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, and I think, that sort of balance is so important because I think vulnerability and honesty is essential, and yet it's what's also essential is people keeping themselves safe and, like you said, sharing things on their
Yeah.
own terms and in a way that's kind of contained and accessible for everyone and balanced. And the way that you write, your article series. I mean, I don't know if you'd be happy to maybe mention that now before the next part, because I love, your article series, well, most recently, but also how you've been posting and what I've been learning from your writing. It's been a huge teaching for me, a huge resource for me. And it's such a skillful way that you describe, for example, the detail you went into to talk about intersectionality, the references, talking about it in your own life, but then also about how you've talked to me about how you access an understanding of that in your community center work, but then in your kind of offer with your practice, with your
Mhm.
business. So it's such an interesting balance that I think you're extremely skilled at. Um, and I love that when we're inviting organizations to have more equitable cultures, that we
Mhm.
can encourage people to really like be curious about who each other really is and say, and it's okay to keep yourself safe and decide on that. Being inclusive in a coaching or a team culture or a corporate culture, it doesn't mean everybody's talking about everything all the time. It means people just being really
Mhm.
honest about the bits that are useful and knowing that all of them, said and unsaid, is welcome. And that's something a bit more nuanced.
Yes, yes, it really is. And I would probably describe that as a way that we carry layered awareness with us as well. And, at the heart of intersectionality, I really try to lean into this isn't just a theory that's in a textbook, but it's a daily reality that shapes how we all move through the world. And, for me, even navigating the current, the stronger headwinds against equity and inclusion work, all the heightened political and societal landscape right now that's happening. For me, it was very much a refusal to dim my light and to not show up authentically. And that's, one of the core motivators for my article series that I continue to be very vocal and visible in this space because the work is so needed and the work will continue as it evolves. But yeah, I'm definitely not going to dim my light. And when I think specifically about a couple aspects of my identity per se, so I identify as Black, I identify as a gay man. And, you know, historically, I may be hesitant to share those aspects of my identity, thinking about the barriers that persist, and still instead now being in the space of layered awareness, where there's also joy and resilience that are part of my identity, and reflecting back to the early days of my career, and I often had to choose which part of myself was safest to bring forward.
Mhm.
And through a lot of great work, intentional reflection, being able to be in my own journey here, I've learned that shrinking to fit, it did not serve me, nor did it serve anyone else.
Mm-mm.
And if we have time, if I could share a quote that has stayed with me
Yes,
for,
please do.
okay. So this quote from Marianne Williamson has stayed with me for over 20 years.
Wow.
And I was first introduced to it. I was watching a movie, and it was a pivotal moment for the main character. But it was also me sitting in that theater. I was like, oh my goodness, like, pause the movie. I need to sit with this for a moment.
Stop the show.
Yes. So here's this quote from Marianne Williamson. Um, Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Well, actually, who are you not to be? Your playing small does not serve the world, and there is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you.
Oh, wonderful. I am aware of that, but I hadn't accessed it for many years. And thank you so much. Oh, Damon, that's so valuable in this work and in this podcast series and in you and your consultancy work has been and will continue to be so valuable because you're quoting that and yet that's what you do, when the way that we met through sharing a training space, you made everybody and me in particular feel really safe to kind of train in a particular way, work in a particular way. And that was through very subtle things that you bring that quality. And now you're sharing that with that quote. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and that sort of leads on to, you said laughter and discomfort can coexist. And how does that show up in your work? And how is that relevant to your work and what we might be talking about today?
Oh, gosh. Let's see. Laughter
And discomfort. So you
and
we
discomfort
we talked about,
coexisting.
yeah, and
Yeah.
how that can show up and how I don't know, it's
Mhm.
relevant somehow, I think.
Well, it is. And as I chuckle right now, thinking about that on this broad, visible area here, but I do find that laughter and discomfort can coexist. In its essence, laughter reminds us that we're all human,
Mm,
and it keeps us grounded and it keeps us open. And discomfort, and this has very much been a reframing over the years for me too. I now view discomfort as it's the edge of growth.
mm,
And when we hold space for both at once, both that humor and honesty, discomfort, it's all coming together, it ends up creating a brave space where people can kind of stretch out without shutting down. And some of my favorite sessions are the ones where we laugh, we cry, we hug it out, and we lean into the hard truth. And when all of that is present, that's really where the transformation starts for folks to really see what is possible feel empowered and feel committed to really nurturing what has started to come about in those sessions when all of that is together and to carry that forward. So there's definitely space for both of those to be together.
Yeah, yeah. And that's really interesting and simple and obvious what you say, but no one's ever named to me before that laughter reminds us that we're human and and it's grounding. You know, laughter's sort of I think of it as joyful, but it's very grounding and it is and essential while navigating some serious topics, and there has to be the space for seriousness as too and reverence and sincerity, but you're describing the balance. And I don't know if you do have this, so I'm just kind of asking this just because it's arisen in my mind, so feel free to answer or not, um but one question that I'm just thinking now is, do you have an example in your whole career or life or any personal work where you've been in a group where you've like a really concrete example where you've seen that sort of edge of discomfort, maybe some laughter, and then some like real growth, you know, for a team or in a personal program has happened? Do you have any examples?
Yes, yes, I do. And it's actually not uncommon, I think, for this experience to come about as I'm conducting sessions where we may be operationalizing inclusion strategies, especially after a recent, let's say, maybe a culture or hiring assessment. So we've got these great flashy strategies that we're excited to roll out. But when we are slowing down and creating the space to go a little bit deeper in terms of what that would really mean to activate some of these strategies, that also invites individuals to share what their lived experience is in the current state of the organization's culture, and then being able to illuminate the path towards that aspirational or that future state. And in those moments, even better when they're in person versus virtual. So I really feel like the magic happens when we're all in the same physical space. But as individuals, I can think back to a session a couple of years ago. We were breaking down how we're going to activate um, a specific strategy, and someone said, "Hold up, we need to pause. Like everything that we're talking about right now is not what I'm experiencing. And I know others are not experiencing, this perceived state of inclusion where we already are." And it was a moment to pause on the agenda and
Hmm.
say something powerful has just been shared. And
Yeah.
now let's invite us to explore that. And there were many tears that were shed as someone was really sharing their personal story and their experience, and that invited others to share as well. And where that could have been a moment where we're like, oh, there's just no path forward, it was very beautiful to see the way that everyone was starting to rally together to have that moment of validation of, they see the individuals that are sharing these experiences, they're committed to wanting to do better. And how do we build a bridge of unity to be able to move forward? And again, there were some tears of sadness. There were some tears of release. There were tears of joy by the end of that multi-day session, and a real commitment to coming together in order to make the desired change around inclusion within the culture.
Amazing. And I don't, are you able to share like a particular inclusive outcome or something that was decided upon?
Mm. So it was very much around that moment where a leader was sharing their specific experience and wanting to create more opportunities for others to be able to share. They didn't want to lose out on what was happening there. And so being able to begin to map out what are other ways that they can capture feedback, whether
Uh-huh.
that is through surveys, through focus groups, one-on-one sessions as well that go beyond just the semi-annual engagement survey. They
Uh-huh.
really wanted to create a space in order for folks to really share what their current experience was like working for that organization. And so, of course, in order to ensure great, open, and honest responses, there was a lot of work that had to happen on the front end in terms of cultivating psychological safety and trust, and then also being able on the back end to showcase that as feedback was being shared, here's how it was being actioned.
Ah, wow. So really practical things about how you gather feedback and multiple mechanisms to appeal to different styles, and then the safety that people can be honest, and then that people know. And again, it goes back to an earlier point or a thread throughout, I think, our conversation, which is about trust, like
Mhm.
co-creating cultures where people trust themselves, they trust the other person, they trust the process, something that a psychiatrist called Ursula Buhlmann and solution focused practitioner teaches me that I've talked about with you and many others before. But I think that's really, but you've talked about that in practical terms with feedback mechanisms. And I imagine that made a real difference to the organization.
Yeah, it was a keep it real moment, for sure. And to make sure that weren't just sitting in this magical fantasy world. It was like, yes, there's an aspirational goal, but we really need to acknowledge where we currently are
Mhm.
and how are we inviting more voices into the space in order to be able to move forward as well. So it was a great example of this team being able to go beyond just being performative to say, oh, we've got the engagement survey twice a year. We're collecting feedback. Everything's fine. We're going to hit these fantastic targets that are out there to say, no, we need to pause and let's be real. Because as stories were being shared from one person, then there were others that were saying, yeah, that's kind of my experience as well. Or I know someone else that is having that too.
Yeah, yeah. So validating the word you used earlier. So just a few more questions. So you were saying that I know that your work has a strong solution focused approach, an element, which is obviously how we met.
Mm.
Um, and I'm curious about a few things really, how you help people notice progress and small steps, or kind of the tiny signs you notice that tell you change is really taking root. And again, any concrete examples of where you've seen this would be brilliant in any of your work, voluntary, community, paid, personal.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, progress. So I'm often reminded of that classic tale about the tortoise versus the hare,
Yeah.
and that great lesson about slow and steady wins the
Yes, I
race.
it's very good teaching.
Yes, it is. It stays with us for a lifetime.
Mm.
And I also invite individuals to embrace that progress is not always going to be flashy and dramatic, like what we may see on our favorite TV show or movie. Um, it's actually,
No.
yeah, exactly. Or it could be in this podcast where it's like, oh, it's been 5 minutes. Look at the transformation. There you go. Um, but instead, it's really going to be subtle and steady. And that could show up in some of those tiny but impactful ways. So we think about perhaps maybe asking a more inclusive question in a meeting, a moment of pausing versus reacting, or even thinking about how feedback is given, how there can be a shift in that as well. Those are all signs of growth. And, when you think about kind of leaning into being solution focused, I would call that an exception. It's the moments where what we hope for is actually already happening.
Hmm.
And when you're able to notice them, then you can reinforce the conditions for them to repeat.
Mm.
And I love that mention of tiny signs. There are some tiny signs that I tend to have heightened awareness around, and they would be around language and behavior.
Hmm.
So, some examples could be like when I see a leader start to credit others publicly, or they use we versus I. Um, I also tend to notice a tiny sign here around when someone calls out bias in a gentle way rather than putting someone on blast in a public forum.
Yes, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
because there's a lot of we think about you go to your anti-bias workshop and it's like, whew, all right, we are all armed with these great strategies, and then folks are just putting everyone on blast all of a sudden where it's like, oh, I see your bias. That's your bias here. And it's like, whew, how can we gently bring individuals in and still be able to call out that bias? So those are some of the tiny signs that I notice.
Yeah, and I love that, not putting people on blast. I've never heard that term. That's brilliant. Um, so thinking about what's one small action you might invite people into thinking about today that could make them, not make them a more inclusive leader, because you use that wonderful example of what's already there, so you can recreate the conditions for it to happen again. But yeah, just an invitation, I guess, to the people watching and listening to think about something in particular that they could do differently or more of, that would signal inclusion and could be the beginning of a wider impact of more inclusivity.
Hmm. Yes. So I am going to go back. We've talked about curiosity a couple of times. And so I would invite our audience to think about ways to replace assumptions with curiosity.
Mm,
So that could look like perhaps one more question before a decision is made.
wow.
Um, a powerful question such as what might make you feel more supported or included, gathering those responses and that feedback before a decision is made. Those are the types of questions that can really change the energy in a relationship, in a team, or even spread throughout the entire organization. So that would be kind of that first step I would invite our audience, replacing assumptions with curiosity. Because every small act of curiosity, it can add up to culture change.
That is so concrete. I really like that. And imagine people being around that level of consultation and that pause and that slowing down before big decisions would just be, you would feel really seen and heard, and again goes back to that kind of innovation, more voices, more wisdom, more even subtle inputs are going to be influencing the direction of travel, which means it's probably going to be quite novel, or have novel
Yeah,
elements instead of how it's always been.
yeah,
um
exactly.
so just a couple more things that'd be brilliant to make sure that we explore, which is one message you'd like the listeners to take away about leading with humanity. um and then the next one I'll ask in a moment.
Yes, I'm like, oh, this conversation has been so wonderful. Our time is passing, and like my inner facilitator has also been activated, where I'm like, oh, it's time to start thinking about takeaways. Let's get things wrapped up here.
The inner facilitator, ever present.
Yeah, always, always. Okay, so let's think here. So a key takeaway about leading with humanity. So I think I would go back and say the reminder around, leadership really begins when we stop trying to be impressive and we start trying to be present. So every interaction is an opportunity to practice empathy, to listen more deeply, and to make someone's day or their work a little bit lighter. Really thinking about the power of that pause. If you are pausing, what are you going to do with that special moment? And if we all do this consistently, the ripple effects that we have talked about, that would be extraordinary. And we'd see more belonging. We'd be seeing more well-being. We'd be seeing more innovation. And all of that being born from the simple act of leading with care.
Wow, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Your approach blends reflection, action, humanity beautifully. And, listeners who want to learn more about your work, who'd like to collaborate, could you share about a little bit about how, what you're working on and how people can connect with you?
Yes, yes, thank you. Um, as I've shared, my work really centers around one idea. And it is that when we lead with humanity, we create the conditions for everyone to thrive. And I have been privileged to be able to help individuals and organizations operationalize that belief through consulting, coaching, as well as learning design. And, if I were to summarize my capabilities maybe in three areas, thinking about how we might be able to collaborate, it would be in that space of transformative learning design and facilitation, having a human-centered culture or inclusion strategy, as well as authentic relationship building and coaching, would be the three capabilities I really lean into. And they're grounded by my values of humanity, integrity, and curiosity. Yes. So, for anyone that may be interested in continuing the conversation, please let's connect on LinkedIn. I have a new article series that is coming up in the coming weeks. It is called Reclaiming Humanity in Hiring, and it will explore how organizations can make their hiring practices more equitable and compassionate. And I also just wrapped up another series, which was titled Reclaiming the Narrative. And that focused on career transitions, helping professionals find clarity and confidence during a season of change.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Yeah. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, if you can connect with Damon on LinkedIn and read everything that you share, it's so valuable. I just want to sort of say, when I was speaking in Berlin at the Future Workforce Summit talking about AI leadership and coaching, and I specifically was inviting people at the summit to think about increasing the diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, belonging, and accessibility of that particular sphere, and then running the workshop on intersectionality, on lived experience, on unconscious bias, and on how we work with all of those things in an informed way. And collaborating with you in the lead up to that, reading your material on LinkedIn, meeting with you, co creating some of that content. You made it feel really professionalized, evidence based, safe. I was able to access research easily and sort of develop something that was really engaging. And I'm so grateful, and obviously we've been working together ever since. So I can really be like a live right now testimonial to the kind of quality of what you bring
Mm.
into this space. So thank you.
Oh,
Thank you for a wonderful conversation. And I hope everybody enjoys it, and see you soon, Damon.
okay. Thank you as well. Thank you for holding this kind of space and for the invitation to be a part of it.